Alright, so with the reveal of the Fire Island chain coming up very soon, I figured it was time for us to put a capper on the many different lore, speculations, theories, and ideas that the original Episode 1 patch from Season 3 of The Living World gave us. So that's what today's video is. We're going to run through the last of the stuff. There is quite a lot, so I might not be able to spend as much time on each topic as I otherwise could, but I think you guys will like what we've got to say, and even I can incorporate some of the information of the Fire Island chain reveal and stuff like the fact that the Skrit are coming into some of these speculations and ideas that we've got here. These are not all from me. This is just generally what I think about the patch, different things that people have been saying, both on my comments and in the wider community since Episode 1 was revealed, and hopefully I'll introduce just a couple of ideas to you guys here that maybe you'd missed out on before. So let's start off first of all with a bit of an addendum to one of the discussions we had before, and that was quite a lengthy one on the idea of Lady Wee. Now if you guys missed that topic and that idea, you can click the link on the screen right now to check it out. She was a very curious character to have been added to Episode 1 of Season 3, but a little addition as to what she might be doing there, people said in response to the video, which is almost so simple, I'm frustrated at myself for having missed it, and I think it could just be the real answer. And this is the idea that Lady Wee at Caudicus's side is the daughter of Minister Wee, the nice Minister Wee, and the original Lady Wee, the woman, the member of the Order of Whispers. This is their daughter, and what's Lady Wee doing with Caudicus? Well, she's with the Order of Whispers, obviously, and she's a spy. She's their daughter. She would obviously have been incorporated into the Order of Whispers through her mother at some point since the personal story and now. Maybe she was always there, even before the personal story, and it was kind of her mission to keep tabs on Caudicus. Caudicus thinks that he's got her under the thumb, and we're going to find out that the Order of Whispers has actually planted an agent in with them already, which I think would be great. We've already heard a little bit in Episode 1 about different agents placed in different places. We've already talked about this theory, perhaps, that Seymour Oxbane, or indeed the human that he's speaking to, this is the Bloodstone chef, was perhaps a spy. We've got ideas of the Order of Whispers having infiltrated the Dermot Priory themselves as well. I like this. It would actually, if this Lady Wee is just a member of the Order of Whispers, do a lot to make the Orders look like they've been less passive in these recent years, and especially the Order of Whispers, who you would think should know something about what's going on with the mantle, and this would be something cool for the devs to introduce when they finally get around to showing us the Orders again at some point. So that's a nice little add-on there. Another little add-on to something that I've mentioned in a previous video as well was my frustrations. This isn't quite lore, but I do want to throw it in there. My frustrations with the way they introduced Bloodstone Fen to us. See, two things have kind of happened recently. We had Noble's Folly, a very small gem store related only area of the world, and we've had Bloodstone Fen. Both of these maps are really secluded and have difficult access points that aren't kind of natural for the rest of the world. So for Noble's Folly, there's no way to actually get to that map without the gem store item, which makes sense because it's a gem store thing or whatever, but it makes it feel a little bit secluded off a small section of the world. And Bloodstone Fen, the far bigger offender, doesn't have a portal into it at all. The only way to get to Bloodstone Fen is number one, having already been there and getting the item that's available from a merchant, and number two, actually doing that bit of the story. And I don't like how separate that map feels at all, and I kind of explained this in a previous video, that I hate the idea of Guild Wars 2 expanding and developing in the future, in that there's all these really illogical routes to seemingly obvious places to go. An open world RPG should give you that feeling that if you go west, it will actually lead you to maps in the west, not these massively secluded, sealed off zones. It's just a slippery slope that I think would be dangerous for the devs to go down. Now I understand though, and this is the addendum, some people came back to me and said, look, they didn't do a portal here because it just wouldn't make sense for new Heart of Thorns accounts. And that's true. Think about it. You've just started Heart of Thorns. The pact has just been shot out of the sky. You hardly know anything about Morgemoth. You go a little bit north. You're helping the Itzel at Jaka Itzel, and all of a sudden you're in Bloodstone Fen. That doesn't make sense. Right, I agree. But we have seen that the devs have got the capability of adding portals and putting NPCs just outside of them who warn you about traveling through them too early. That happened all the time. It's just the same as a low-level Norn character at launch going north from their starting zone, Wayfarer Foothills, and suddenly ending up in the level 80 Frostgorge Sound with a bunch of pact camps everywhere, even though the pact hasn't been set up at this time of the story. I don't think it's too much of a leap. And if at worst, they could have just added the portal there, connecting Verdant Brink to Bloodstone Fen, and made it so that there's an NPC stood next to the portal who only people who have done that Living World episode can speak to and unlock the dialogue to push you through. I don't know, maybe it's an arbitrary or tiny thing. It's something I wanted to throw out there as we wrap up the last of all this discussion from episode 1. Alright, let's get into some more cool lore. We're going to start off today with a little bit of stuff about the script. Why the script? Well, maybe it's because they're on my mind a lot. I mentioned that I didn't really like they're in the next patch. It does frustrate me, and don't get me wrong, I understand that the script are cool. I understand that having a bit of comic relief in there sometimes is nice. Having a cutesy character in there sometimes is nice. I understand that the script, whether I like them or not, are there in the subject material now, and there's something to be utilized. However, I think we have seen too much script recently. There was script in Drytop, there's script in the Silver Waste, there was script in Auric Basin, there could have been script in Tangled Depths and Verdant Brink, I'm not entirely sure, but there was script again in the last Heart of Thorns map too, and it just doesn't seem like they're appropriate for what is supposed to be a menacing, devastating, brimstone-filled environment. But maybe there is something to save this, and so this is a theory. This is not a theory of mine. Funnily enough, before this Fire Island chain stuff was revealed and the fact that the script are coming, somebody sent me a message saying, hey WP, I love everything you've talked about with episode 1, but why haven't you mentioned the script at all? And this threw up a couple of flags to me, because I didn't really think the script were very relevant, but there is something more to it. Two things, in fact. Number one, don't forget that the Dragon Primordus didn't just drive the Asura out of the depths of Tyria, he also drove the Skrit out. And so the Skrit do have a vested interest in the Primordus story, and if that is indeed what we're going into now, I can understand why the devs would put the Skrit in there now with this episode 2 update, so that we can maybe rally behind them and get involved with them a little bit. But here's the other thing, and that's that the Skrit don't always have to be these stupid little comic relief characters. There is ample room in the lore and exciting space in the lore for the Skrit to become something truly menacing and badass and a real force to be reckoned with. And what do I mean by this? Well, think about it, guys. The Skrit are kind of the nemesis of the Asura. The Asura hate the Skrit. And that's kind of weird, right? Like, the arguably most intelligent race out there consider them to be a threat and a rival. There's a fantastic short story the devs once wrote about this, and it's because of the way that the Skrit's hive mind works. I think most players are familiar with this, but the idea is the more Skrit you get together, because of the way they communicate at very high-pitched, very incredibly fast speeds, the more of them you get together, the smarter they become, because they can relay information between one another that much quicker. And it doesn't take too much for a gathering of Skrit to suddenly be able to rival, intellect-wise and force-wise, the Asura, and they will begin inventing themselves. They will begin finding things, dismantling them, learning how they work, coming up with plans. But the problem with the Skrit is usually when their colonies get too large, they begin to splinter, the factions break away, and as the Skrit separate and spread out, that information and communication can't last, and then they end up becoming kind of stupid and into smaller cells again. So this is the push-pull between the Skrit and the Asura. The Asura don't like the Skrit because they compete with them on the Asuran level, alright? And so now look at this patch. We've got the Skrit and supposedly kings and queens, okay? So what does that mean? That means that the Skrit on the Fire Island chain, there's a lot of them, and that means they are smart enough to survive on the Fire Island chain. What I think the devs might be doing here is introducing the Skrit and showing a deeper level to them. These aren't the cutesy comic relief little guys we're going to be meeting here. These are actually a bit more menacing. They're much smarter, they're much more careful about the way they do things, and they have found out how to survive in this environment because there are that many. Guild Wars at launch didn't really show this very well in many places. The best was Skritsburg in Brisbane Wildlands, where there were so many Skrit together to have supposedly found a big city and they had a king. And they all spoke better. If you actually looked at a lot of their non-voice acted dialogue, the text was written, then they all spoke very properly and correctly, and it was kind of fun, but they've never shown it that well. And I'm wondering whether maybe these are very hardy, very smart Skrit we're going to find on the Fire Island chain. Now, what does this have to do with episode 1, where the Skrit didn't appear? Well, it relates to this message that I was sent, okay? And it's this idea of what Timey invented in episode 1 that is actually a very scary thing in the wrong hands. What am I talking about? I'm talking about this communication device. I'm talking about her version of, the internet or whatever, her radio. Timey has developed a means to communicate with us across massive distances. Now, this device on its own may not seem that interesting, but imagine now, for a second, if the Skrit got their hands on that idea, if the Skrit began to communicate on such a vast level with one another, they would very quickly become the greatest force on Tyria. And that could be something very useful when we're fighting an Elder Dragon. No? Especially when they also, in theory, should hate that Elder Dragon. So that's a very cool theory. Moving on, another short thing that I really don't have too much to say about, but I'd like to get you guys in on the loop. It's to do with the Bloodstones, and of course there's this major theory, right, that throughout the rest of the season we're going to be traveling to various locations around Tyria where Bloodstone shards are located in order to stop them from exploding, or stop Elder Dragons from consuming them, or stop Lazarus from consuming them, or whatever. Well, the story of the Bloodstones is layered in that, way back at the launch of Prophecies, they established something called a Keystone. Now, this Keystone was supposedly made to help reunify the Bloodstone, right, which had been split into multiple chunks. Now that we've seen in episode 1 that a huge chunk of the Bloodstone has actually been fully destroyed, the question is raised, okay, does the Keystone fix that? Can the Keystone fix the destruction that was wrought upon Bloodstone Fen? And that's a pretty interesting question. Or was this something that the Seers, the creators of the Bloodstone and the Keystone, never really accounted for? So we might see a little bit more of that. But further, even beyond that idea of the Keystone, there's also humanity. Now, humanity are a big part of the current patches, and what we've also been hearing in current patches is that the White Mantle have infiltrated everywhere, even the highest levels of society. And one location you might consider to house many high members of society within Divinity's reach is the Throne Room. And the Throne Room, since the launch of Guild Wars 2, has always had this mysterious rock in it, as you can see on the screen back there. Some people have speculated that it was a full-on Bloodstone before. I'm wondering now whether perhaps this is the full-on Keystone, maybe. And what would that be doing there? This could easily tie into any number of stories to do with Livia throughout the ages, who potentially could now be Countess Anise, and all sorts. So do keep the Keystone in mind, keep that massive rock in mind as well. These are things I wanted to mention about episode 1, but just really didn't have a chance to for a while. Moving on a little bit more, so I want to talk a bit about the Shiver Peaks. So again, the theory is we're going to all these different places with Bloodstone shards. We know that now that the next patch is not the Shiver Peaks. It's actually the Fire Island Chain. I've speculated for a while that the Fire Island Chain might be a place we'll go, but I kind of thought it'd be the end of the season, not right now. That's crazy to me. I thought we'd be going to the Shiver Peaks very soon. I still think the Shiver Peaks are very much on the table. And why? Well, we've got a lot of evidence for it. 1, there's a Bloodstone shard there. 2, in the raid, we saw all these pictures showing the Shiver Peaks. 3, we have the incorporation of Primordus, and Primordus has another big nemesis, not just the Asura and the Skrit and these other subterranean races. I believe the Skelk are included too, but actually you've got the Dwarves as well. And so the Dwarves are really interesting because the Dwarves turn themselves to stone specifically to fight Primordus. The fact that Primordus is now more active may suggest, by the way, that they lost the fight, and that really we're not going to see many Dwarves down there, but I think the more exciting direction for the story to go in is that we finally get to interact with people like King Jarlis Ironhammer once again. We also have that concept art that appeared, I believe, at one of the conferences, was it? Where they showed the Shiver Peaks, and it was called Dwarven Valley. So let's expand on this just a little, because I think there are some even further cool things to think about when it comes to the Shiver Peaks. And that starts with a small detail that was added into Bloodstone Fen itself. I haven't mentioned yet, and I undoubtedly think most players won't have noticed. And what is that? Well, it's the portals. Remember that in Bloodstone Fen, there are all these portals teleporting random creatures from all over Tyria around? Well, some of the creatures we see are ice wolves. Now you might think, oh, what about that's kind of weird, I guess. What are you suggesting here? Perhaps the suggestion is that because of this Bloodstone creation, creatures that exist near other Bloodstones, such as the one in the Shiver Peaks, are somehow linked together and teleporting around. But that's not the entire story. That's not the whole theory. What you need to understand about the ice wolves in Bloodstone Fen is that they're an entirely new type of creature. Yep. They seem to have just been invented and dropped in this patch. We've, of course, seen lots of other varieties of wolves, and we've seen ice brood wolves and stuff, but specifically this variety of wolf, as far as I understand, hasn't been in Guild Wars 2 before. So why would the devs randomly do that just to use it as a small thing in Bloodstone Fen? Well, maybe it makes more sense that they've actually got a big icy Shiver Peak map and ready to go out in a future update, and they're pulling some of the new ambient creatures that they've designed for there, and dropped them as a little bit of a hint into Bloodstone Fen. So that's a very exciting idea. Moving on, you can look a little bit at Guild Wars 1 and the White Mantle and realize something about the Shiver Peaks that makes it important to the White Mantle beyond just the Bloodstone fragment. So the idea here is that the Mantle are in Kryta, they're in the Maguma jungle because of the Bloodstone Shard, they're perhaps even residing now in Fire Island Chain X Masart strongholds. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. But they're also in the Shiver Peaks, not just because of the Bloodstone Shard, but because there's a really important place to them there. And that would be Thunderhead Keep. So if you guys don't know what Thunderhead Keep was, it was, in my opinion, the best moment of all of Prophecies, the original release of Guild Wars. At this one mission, a lot of different storylines came to a head, and it was a very difficult mission, especially at launch, that a lot of players couldn't do. It was the final place you went before traveling to the Fire Island chain in Guild Wars 1. And what happened here was the current Confessor, the leader of the White Mantle at that time, Confessor Dorian, died at Thunderhead Keep. Basically, the civil war between the dwarves came to a head, and Dagnar Stonepate, the murderer of Prince Rurik, was killed, and the Confessor was killed at the same time too. So wouldn't it make sense, actually, if the White Mantle are interested in the Shiver Peaks, that they might be residing in the ruins of Thunderhead Keep, that at some point they may have gone there to collect their Confessor's body, that somehow they consider this to have been a holy place? I think that would make a lot of sense, and it would be very cool to see the Masart interacting, and the White Mantle interacting with these old regions that were so pivotal and so important towards those last areas of Prophecies. So if ArenaNet adds a Shiver Peak map, well, there's a little bit more incentive for them, right? It could be right there in the region of Thunderhead Keep. And not only this, one final thing as well that makes the Thunderhead Keep area of the Shiver Peaks a really likely candidate for the next Shiver Peak map, okay, is the existence of a Masart-created portal. So, it's revealed at the end of Prophecies that there are tons of Masart on the Fire Island chain. This much we know. I've already talked about the Onyx Gate and the fortress and so forth that they built there. It was really important that they stayed there. One of the ways that they maintained a presence on the mainland, though, was through a portal they'd built connecting the Fire Island chains. Where to? Not to their homelands, the Janthir Bay, Isle of Janthir, or anything like that. It was actually to the southern Shiver Peaks. And this makes sense, because maybe they wanted to be near both Bloodstones or something. But that portal in Prophecies, you and Vizier Kilbron, as the heroes, actually go through. I think the reverse might happen in Guild Wars 2. The next patch is taking us to the Fire Island Chains. Awesome. Maybe we'll go there from Ratasum or something, and that's yet to be seen. But once we're there, I think we may actually find that portal disused, and as a part of the story, rebuild it, travel through it, and find ourselves in the middle of more White Mantle territory, right on the edge of Thunderhead Keep again, and all that juicy stuff can happen from there forward. In fact, I'd start putting money on that may be how episode 2 ends, and that's how we end up going out into the Shiver Peaks, and this idea of visiting places with Bloodstones continues on even more. So I think that's all really exciting. The Shiver Peaks, as another thing, have known seer activity. The seer told us in Guild Wars 1 to fight this mythical beast called the Eidolon, of which we could infuse our armor with its essence to protect ourselves. Maybe that will come back in Guild Wars 2. Maybe we're going to go to Eidolon spawning grounds, which again is in the Shiver Peaks, to help us against the Masart. Any number of things could happen, but a lot of them, the involvement of the dwarves, who may return to their old strongholds. Don't forget, this is called the Deldramore Front, the Deldramore Dwarves. It's just so much Shiver Peak stuff, guys. So much. I think we could be fast headed to that right after the Fire Island chain. Segueing on just a little, speaking of the Shiver Peaks, I did want to talk a bit about Jormag. A lot of people are very pumped right now about the idea of not just fighting Primordus, but fighting Jormag too. Now, I've expressly told you guys, I think the coolest story ArenaNet could have done and Guild Wars could have done would have been had the Primordus be the first one to wake up and Primordus be the last one we defeat. I've explained to you guys what makes Primordus so cool, and so I've suggested that just because he's active, it doesn't mean we're going to kill him next. They might do a thing where they make all the dragons active very quickly, and there is precedent for this in episode 1. I haven't showed to you guys yet. There's a very small line you can get from a Norn named Rune at Air's funeral, and Rune explains that many of Jormag's minions and the Sons of Svanir are gaining influence and growing stronger. We also have this idea at some point, presumably, we're going to find Bram, who's been out alone, and the fact that he's been fighting against some of these Jormag creatures. So actually, this idea of the Shiver Peaks, this idea that maybe we'll have a fire versus ice dragon fight is all very cool. In fact, what would be even cooler is we have a fire dragon versus an ice dragon battle, and suddenly out of nowhere, like in Pokemon Gen 4 with Giratina, we have Kralkatorrik come out of nowhere and interfere the battle, and everything kind of gets gets blown wide open. That would be pretty incredible, right? Still leaving Primordus perhaps for some kind of final kill. The amount of cool places that they could take the story here is very nice. But yes, there's been a lot suggesting Primordus, but even Jormag 2 did get a bit of a look in this patch, and I don't think we should overlook that, especially the fact that I didn't really talk about it. I wanted to do that here. More with the White Mantle, tiny little thing. Have you guys ever wondered why we get bloodstone dust everywhere all over the game world? Why it's packaged up into these nice little packages? Well, episode 1, through some of the dialogue, seems to suggest that maybe it's the White Mantle that we're doing that. It's a fairly inconsequential point, but an eye-opening one nonetheless. All their activity at the Maguma Jungle Bloodstone, and maybe some of the others, had been fracturing it, breaking this dust up, grinding it, doing whatever they could with, and they'd been trading with it, and somehow that's how it ended up getting all over Tyria. A fun little nod that was in the patch, and I wanted to make you guys all aware of. Next, another small thing I'm looking forward to in the Fire Island chain, and indeed the Shiver Peaks. Because the Masat are back now, obviously I'm unsated, my thirst has not been quenched, I want more and more and more, I want to see the Titans, I want to see the Seers. Well, one thing I'm looking forward to in the next patch is don't forget that there was Seer influence, not just in the Southern Shiver Peaks, but on the Fire Island chain too. You could meet a Seer on the Fire Island chain who helped you in 2 different locations. And so not only in this next patch might we get more backstory on the Masat, but we may even find a couple of ruins based on Seer stuff, and we may even get to communicate with some things there. That's something I think you guys should really look out for. Are we going to get the Titans already? I don't know. I think that would be a very good idea for Guild Wars 2 though. I think that the Guild Wars 2 engine can show the Titans in a better way than Guild Wars 1 could, because it could make bigger, more interesting creatures. And if they're not doing the Keystone stuff in the Royal Palace, I think this is also a great way to reintroduce Livia maybe, and the idea of the Scepter of All, which can control said Titans. Next on the list is a very interesting theory. This isn't mine, but maybe you guys subscribe to it, and perhaps I'd like to hear what you guys think about it in the comments. But it's to do with Ascalon. And you might think, well, what do you mean Ascalon? What's going on there, WP? We've got a little bit of a mystery going on with Ritlock, but what else? Well, episode 1 did establish to us that the souls, somehow, of those slain in the vicinity of the Bloodstone continue returning to it. That these are undead, that these are ghosts, that these are people lingering on Tyria, and this undead activity really has nothing to do with Zhaitan. It's the pull and the allure of a Bloodstone that's keeping people there. Well, one thing that might be interesting to think about then is Ascalon and the Faux Fire. Now, we've expressly heard that the Faux Fire and the unending ghosts of Ascalon and so forth come from the twin swords, Sahothin and Magdair, that this perhaps could have been Orion magic then would have been based off of Zhaitan's, seeping out below or something. That's what I've generally thought, but there have been ideas now that maybe one of these other big Bloodstone shards, of which we don't know where it is yet, remember, that's still a thing, perhaps one of them's under Ascalon somehow, and because of this shard's impact in Ascalon, this is really the way that you would end the Faux Fire. And these Orion artifacts, this Sahothin and Magdair, perhaps they were somehow just tampering with that Bloodstone in some way. Again, I'm not sure how I feel about that connection. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I think it's significant enough and not discreditable enough that I'll at least give it to you guys. Okay, and so the last thing I really want to talk about for today, and it's probably my favorite theory and an interesting little thing to think about, is related to the Inquest and the White Mantle. So episode 1 established to us what? That the Inquest actually have had some stake in the White Mantle's activities, that there's been some form of collaboration there over the years. And this is very, very cool. Why is it very, very cool? Well, because if you think about it, back at the launch of the game, when we had Ara Explorable Mode, Path 2 of Ara Explorable Mode showed the Inquest doing significant research into the Masat. Yeah, remember what some of the enemies you fight in Ara are Inquest. They're the guys with the annoying guns that keep you permanently stun-locked, while some of the Risen in the area, the Deadeyes, will then shoot you. There are various Inquest operatives, and the Inquest even learn a lot about the Masat's capabilities when it comes to slipping out of phase with Tyria. Why were the Inquest so interested in the Masat? Well, perhaps now finally we have our answer for that. Maybe it's because it was born out of this collaboration with the White Mantle. But it can go even deeper than that, and be even more interesting than that when you combine a couple of theories together. And so let's look at Heart of Thorns for a second. Heart of Thorns introduced to us Rata Novus, something pretty left field really, and one of the biggest things from Guild Wars 1 lore that Heart of Thorns started playing with and reintroduced to us was the Asuran character of Zin. So that seems really weird and without precedent. The devs didn't have to start talking about Zin again, but they did. And we haven't met Zin yet. Zin's ghost could still exist on Tyria just as Ula's ghost does, as we've talked about in theories before. He could be residing in the deeper levels of Ratanovus, which are still a very good chance to appear at some point in this season, should the story choose to take that direction. But what I want you to think about is one of the biggest theories that was born of Zin's involvement in Heart of Thorns and what we learned about him. And that is the theory that after founding Ratanovus, Zin went off to create the organization known as the Inquest. We don't know at any point when Zin ended up leaving Ratanovus. We know that many of his goals and ambitions and aims are in line with the way that the Inquest works. We know that the establishment of the Inquest is one of these long-term mysteries the devs have always thrown at us. So that idea that Zin is the leader of the Inquest has always been a strong one. And now we hear, though, that the Inquest are collaborating with the White Mantle in the modern timelines. This would be very interesting and fun to think about, because back in Guild Wars 1, Zin helped destroy the White Mantle. Zin was responsible for finding the protections against the Massat, those few that were remaining in the Crichton Civil War, and Zin was decidedly against them. So should Zin have been the leader of the Inquest, and now his organization is somehow collaborating with the White Mantle? That could say an untold number of things. It could suggest that Zin was ousted at some point against his will. It could suggest, I guess, that he's changed his mind. It could suggest that the Inquest have got another angle that the White Mantle don't know about. There are a lot of fun things that can come out of that. A lot more reasons why we might like to see Zin in the upcoming future. And what better backdrop to stage it all around than a battle with the Asuran Elder Dragon Nemesis Primordus. That would be great, right? So there you go, guys. Those are all the theories. That's pretty much everything I think I had to say about episode 1, though many things would have slipped through the cracks. If you're up for some cool discussion, please feel free to talk about it in the description below. If you stick about during the end slate in just a couple of seconds, there'll be a link, since we talked about Thunderhead Keep today, to that epic moment in Guild Wars 1. And even better, one of the most impressive things in gameplay I've ever done on the channel. It's actually me soloing that mission. One of the things that really put me back on the map way back in the early days before Guild Wars 2 was even out as a YouTuber. So if you're interested in that, that'll be there. But thanks very much for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you very shortly. Catch you next time, guys.
Get out of it. And usually I couldn't do it without that, but I just spent like about an hour or so practicing, and I'm pretty sure it was a fluke, but I managed to get it done. So you know what, I'm not complaining. Here's the next group. This is the one of the other patrols we were looking out for. Oh, and as you can also see, I managed to get the Shining Blade this time. Because I wasn't filming, I felt it was okay to take a little bit more time at the start, and it is quite hard at the start without the Shining Blade.